Hello and welcome to Better Living with Sporting Ethos. I am Rishabh Jaiswal. I am the High Performance Director at Sporting Ethos. I am joined by Rukshara, who's the Head of Sport and Clinical Nutrition. And the topic we are addressing today is why does corporate wellness in India run under Revamp? So Rukshara, what comes to your mind when we use the words corporate wellness?
A lot of workshops,
Okay. What about a lot of step tracking?
marathon signups,
New meal plans, which are few of those things you haven't heard of?
sports leagues.
Yes, and the number of events around corporate wellness are well meaning, but sometimes they can get overwhelming for the employees. So, we have a lot of comparing numbers, Rukshara, which we have collated out of the existing research and some of the work we've been doing in the last 6 months. So, that really sheds a very different light on how corporate wellness is currently functioning. So, could you please share some of the insights you have?
Yes, of course. A lot of the numbers are not new to us. Even in the corporate space, pretty much everybody is already aware that the longer you spend time at your desk, the shorter your lifespan is going to get. In fact, there's a very interesting number on this which suggests that every extra hour that you spend at your desk beyond 7 hours actually decreases your lifespan by 5%, which is quite significant. And despite there being, so many initiatives by different companies to engage their employees in health-related workshops and things like that, we still see numbers related to thin fat Indian obesity, metabolic syndrome, diseases related to your cholesterol, diabetes, cancers. All of these are actually shooting up. So a lot of statistics actually suggest that almost 42% of the urban Indian population is actually thin fat obese, which means their BMI is actually normal. They're not overweight, but when you measure their waist circumference or you measure their body fat percentage, it comes high. And that actually, it could put them in the bracket of someone who's obese or overweight and still faces the same amount of disease risk.
So basically, a lot of us monitor our weight sometimes on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
So does weight have anything to do with your overall health? Because you're talking about the people who have a good BMI, right? And our understanding of BMI is that, okay, anything between 18 to 25 is fine, which a lot of people may be falling under. Even people who run marathons and long distance races, this could change things up for them. Right?
Yes, that's actually true because in a lot of workshops, there's heavy emphasis on body weight checking, height checking. Their BMIs are calculated and people are given scorecards saying you're overweight, you're obese, you're underweight.
Based on BMI.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually, I would say that's redundant science because there's a lot of research that has come up, especially in the Indian subcontinent. We are very prone to being thin fat. If you look at a typical Indian body type, walking on the road, you'll always notice we have thinner limbs, thinner arms and thinner legs, but a lot of our belly fat presence is much higher compared to things like our musculature if we compare ourselves to the rest of the world. So I think there's a definite need to shift focus onto measuring body fat rather than body weight, especially in a corporate workshop setup.
You talked about measuring, right? So this is something you've been doing for the last 12 years with athletes. Any work we do with athletes, whether it's their physical fitness, their diet, we try to measure, even if there's a rehabilitation, so that we measure it so that we exactly know where we are and where we are going.
Right.
And I think that is largely something which probably hasn't put a lot of emphasis on. Could you share some some details of the discussions you had in our corporate camps with regards to the body composition in particular and other aspects which we have measured? How did the audience, the employees who were coming there, how did they react to these numbers?
Yeah. I think there was definitely a lot of interest because it was slightly more hands-on for them. They could actually come up, do some of the tests, almost like a game for a lot of the employees, and I think they thoroughly enjoyed the experience. With respect to my experience of conversations that I had with the corporate camps we have conducted across different board of employees, was that a lot of people were actually surprised to see the numbers that they were seeing. And this was more prominent amongst the female employees than amongst the males. Like a lot of them came with the notion that, I don't need to do this test. I'm fine. In fact, I need to probably eat more because I'm underweight. But when we looked across their body composition reports, we found that they were under-muscled and probably, carrying over levels of fat, which was kind of new information and new insight for them. And I think that way it was quite eye-opening for a lot of employees. And some of them, yes, they were quite keen and they'd already done the testing elsewhere and stuff like that. So they were quite keen on checking how the levels have changed now. And we had some great conversations around their body fat levels, their approach to building muscle, why it's important to work on muscle, especially if you're a female. And yeah, a lot of the other tests, I think the grip strength one was a definite crowd favorite.
Right.
At one point, there was a lot of, there was a huge line to actually test, and it became almost like a competition. And weirdly, I mean, grip strength is a fantastic measure of your upper body strength, and therefore, a lot of parameters, including your longevity.
Yes.
Yes.
Survey your longevity. There's a lot of research on
Yes. So I think it was a fabulous, it was a great experience to speak to the employees and see their reactions to their numbers, which was quite insightful for them as well.
Right. So, I think so we obviously talked about corporate wellness when we started, but there's some very well positioned corporate wellness program where the intent is very good, right? So, obviously you need to have access to the medical experts. You need access to the counseling or the psychology part of it also, because the stress levels are very high. You have access to gym memberships, right? And of course the nutrition part which we spoke about. So there are well-meaning programs out there. But what we saw, and I have been seeing, is that, let's say, like a typical corporate person, I'd say 70 to 75% of us are more sedentary in nature, but our intent is to get healthier and get fitter. And we do try. We take up meal plans, we try to exercise, and sometimes even these well-meaning intentions and good offerings fall short, because let's say I want to go and work out and I'm working on my diet also, but I have severe knee pain if I try to jog. Now, your work, as you told me, gets limited if you're trying to get someone to work on a routine, including their diet, but they are kind of limited by their knee pain. But if there's no one addressing that knee pain as a long-term solution, then you have limited physical activity, and therefore you can only make as much gains. And then the stressors come in, the lack of motivation comes in, and then you go back to square one. So I think that is a very common feature, which at the employee level, at the individual level, which people face. So how do you think they can get out of this rut, and how a scientific and individualized approach can help them figure out a way where they're making progress over a period of time and not having this constant shuttle between starting off, going somewhere and then coming back again, because that also could be very demotivating.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think everything's interrelated in the body. Nothing works in isolation. And this is a common feeling that a lot of us can relate to, wherein, it's a sign of positive reinforcement. Every time you exercise, you feel like eating better. Every time you eat better, you get better sleep, better energy. And therefore, the positive cycle continues. But every time you experience a roadblock, let's say you hit a niggle, like a knee pain that you described, or lower back pain, which tends to be quite common amongst corporate employees, it kind of kills your motivation in one department, which then dominoes into negative effects on other departments. And before you know, you're spiraling down and you don't know what to do about it. So yeah, absolutely. I think a roadmap that tackles your personal pain points is going to be absolutely crucial if you're trying to break out of the cycle of taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, which tends to happen when you're not addressing, the baseline issues which keep pestering you over a long period of time, and they're basically acting like the main hindrance between you reaching your, future health goals. So I think if it's, like you mentioned, a knee pain issue, it's absolutely important that that's not ignored. And something like a back pain, it's a very treatable issue, but a lot of people just give up and they think that, if they've got back pain, all they can do is probably walk, and they don't need to lift weights, they don't need to do anything else. And that kind of spirals into bigger issues that then become chronic and are not treated. And before you know, you're limited in your movement, and it starts affecting your weight, which affects your motivation, that affects your mental health, and it affects your productivity, focus. The list can go on and on. So I think with respect to an approach, very important to assess where you stand. So interestingly, one of the tests we had done in our camps was the functional movement screening. I think it's a fabulous test, and I recommend everyone to get it done, because it basically just teaches you how well your body is moving in very innate human movements that we all should be able to perform correctly. but you will be surprised by the number of people who actually don't do well at these basic movement tests. And that can prove that you might not be ready to start exercising a certain way till you start fixing your basic movement so that you don't, stand the risk of injury. And once you work on your functional movement, you can start addressing other issues, other pain points. Like if you tend to keep, getting pain in your shoulder, I think it's a great idea to get that checked out. And once you know what your pain points are, you can actually talk to a trainer who can help you devise a personalized approach and work on strengthening these personal areas. And then, of course, the dietary bit can be you focusing individually on your, areas where you feel you need slightly more love and care. So, yeah, I think that's usually the approach we like to take.
Since you mentioned some of the assessments you've done, so the functional movement screen, we did it for 3 out of the 7 movements.
Yes.
And first thing we found was that 49% of the people we assessed were in active pain or had a very recent and major injury history. Right, that's a staggering number. The second thing is that out of those people who did not have active pain, more than half had their functional movement score which was below a satisfactory level.
Wow.
Below satisfactory level is if you have 3 tests, you're scoring less than 213 on an average on all the 3 tests. So you mentioned back pain, right? Now back pain is highly related to the hamstring mobility, which is one of the functional movement tests we carry out. 33% of the people we tested had very poor hamstring mobility. So I just scored a 0 or 1 on 3, which basically means even if they don't have any issues right now, going forward, they are candidates for lower body pain and injuries, including knee-related, ankle-related issues, as well as your back pain. You mentioned grip strength. 62% of the people we assessed were in the lowest bracket of grip strength. As per Indian standards, the Western standard is slightly higher, and that is an alarming number because you're talking about longevity, you're talking about neuromuscular recovery.
Right.
So those are numbers which we have just started coming to us with the active measurements we are doing with the Indian corporate population. Now, Rukshara, I want to delve into since we're talking about an individual perspective, and then we'll also come to challenges which are faced by the management of the human resources. But again, at the individual level, one of the perception is that with age, things would get worse. As you get older, you have a family life, you get stressed, you have lack of sleep. That is when the health issues will start showing up, and you need to really, change your game. And there is this sense of, I would probably say, overconfidence or just being okay about it, is that people are in the mid-20s or under 30 in fact will somehow cope with any physical effects or nutritional effects over a period of time because their body can still take it. They're relatively young. Even if it's an injury, it would heal in quick time. So that is something which was also challenged with the numbers we have. All these numbers I reported were actually almost equal for people under 30 and people above 30 age group. The 62% grip strength were lowest bracket, same for under 30, same for above 30, same with the hamstring mobility, and across gender also the numbers were same. So now my question is that at the individual level, if these perceptions are there, how does one break? How do you make yourself realize that okay, while I'm feeling fine, why do I need to actually work on my health, etc.? Because in the long term, it could get worse.
Yeah. That's a great question, actually. And in fact, we tend to face a lot of resistance when it comes to health longevity, especially when you're dealing with young adults in the 20 to 35 bracket, because most of them are still settling in life. They're still enjoying, the new sources of income and things like that. So I think it's really important to, understand that the numbers don't lie, right? Despite the fact that there is awareness and it's increasing day by day and people are realizing that how important nutrition, exercise, physical activity, managing stress, all of this is, still somewhere I think in India we are lacking on the implementation front. And a lot of that is because people are not able to relate to the facts they hear. And one of the best ways to kind of open people's eyes is to give them a hands-on approach where they see something and that shocks them. And that kind of propels them into taking action. I think a great example of that is, every time we deal with our in-house clients here in Delhi, if I recommend a certain blood test to someone who's in their mid-20s, I'll coax them a little bit and I'll ask them, get this test, you've got family history, let's see. Even if everything is normal, it's a great idea to just do a preventative testing and see where you stand. So every time we'll do a test, in fact, in my personal experience, I think almost 20 to 30% of the times we've recommended blood tests to people. Even if something as simple as, doctors will prescribe fasting sugar tests, HbA1cs, very common tests to check for history of diabetes. But very few people actually test for their fasting insulin levels, which is actually the precursor to diabetes. And a lot of people, as per scientific research, which is very strong, start developing insulin resistance in their 20s and 30s, which later on manifests into diabetes in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s. So there's this big myth that certain diseases just come with age and you just wake up one day and you develop it. That's actually not true. It couldn't be further away from the truth. Most of the metabolic diseases and non-communicable diseases, which we hear about these days, are absolutely preventable if you start taking certain precautions in your 20s and 30s. And I think the first way to start taking precaution is to start getting tested and doing the right tests and knowing where you stand.
It's interesting you mentioned the blood test, because also sometimes the reports and they come out, you will see, okay, these levels are in the normal range.
Yeah.
But when you put 2 or 3 parameters together, you would actually figure out, like you mentioned about the insulin resistance, right? Those numbers right in the normal range could actually have a different meaning when put together. So could you shed some light on that also? Because even if you get the blood test done, you could be, and the idea is not to scare anyone, right? That something wrong is going to happen. I think that's a cultural thing also.
Yeah.
Typically, you will say, okay, let me get healthy, let me lose weight, then I get my blood test done.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think it's just more of a cultural thing. And it's a very difficult thing to break out of. It needs courage, actually. Yeah. So you don't want things to be going wrong for you, right? But can you just shed some more light on that in terms of why even the ranges you look at sometimes could be misleading?
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people get paranoid whenever I mention the word blood test and injections. So there's definitely no fear around it. In fact, I like to tell our clients to look at it in a positive sense. I tell them, see, this is just preliminary testing. Even if things come slightly off, the good news is we can work on improving it. Would you rather find out something when there's nothing that can be done and the system is completely broken, you can just kind of manage it with medication? Or would you prefer fixing a problem when it's in a fixable state? So that generally kind of does bring a slight mindset shift and people become more open to, knowing more about their health. And when it comes to blood tests, I think it's interesting that you bring up this point, because a lot of people will just look at one particular number on the reference range and they'll be like, oh, this is come slightly off. What does this mean? Is my liver not functioning as it should, or am I in danger? There's nothing like that. In fact, any doctor also you would go to, they would always say that everything you see on a blood test needs to be correlated with the symptoms, and you need to see different variables in a common sense. How are they kind of interacting with each other? What are the numbers looking like together? And something like an insulin resistance can have a range which could be very wide. Even in the normal range, there is an optimal range you want to be in, and then a range which is borderline high and a range which is dangerously high. So many times just, an untrained eye might miss those numbers if you're just looking at your own blood tests at home. So I highly recommend that you speak to a professional and you get the right tests. Just getting a simple fasting blood sugar or an HbA1c won't help you diagnose a hidden insulin resistance if that's something that you're actually dealing with and it's making it difficult for you to lose that belly fat.
Another important thing I want to touch upon is, especially post-COVID, the psychological impact on exercise, on diet, on managing small illegals, pain, etc. I mean, we are seeing it in our practice, right?
Right.
It's increased significantly, of course, because of the different kinds of trauma we all went through. How do you see that impacting an individual's approach? And have you figured out some ways where they can still align themselves, trust themselves to work on something? Because you have different stressors now. And that can immediately impact. Let's say if you're stressed, you will probably start having meals where you have eaten much more, right? So those are individual instances. Largely, they are playing a very significant role. So we cannot really isolate the practice of working and measuring on one's health, then trying to improve it, because time and again, some mental, psychological stressor is going to come and throw a curve quality.
Right. Yeah. So I think you're right about the stress. In fact, with every passing year, the stress levels just keep increasing with new issues that keep plaguing the world. But I think there are two ways you can handle this. One is the approach that you take. Of course, it's going to be very different from person to person because everybody's threshold towards stress is different. Everybody's stressors are very different. And likewise, your approach is going to be different to handling it. And I think that can be very much seen with the way we sometimes deal with our, clients. And many times there could be people who feel wonderfully towards tracking their numbers and seeing everything quantitatively. And then there could be a section who do much more better on positive reinforcement and being told, qualitative things about working on their health and things like that. And they don't want anything to do with the numbers because it gives them more anxiety. So yeah, I think different things work for different people. But at the same time, it's important to mention the mental side of things. And it's really important to start working on building that threshold towards stress, which is so important in today's world.
Now let's look at some of the practical problems which come in terms of logistics, etc. Like I've been speaking with a lot of HR leaders, right? One thing obviously is that I think probably when they are trying to introduce an initiative, there's so much which has happened during COVID. People may not be very interested on the face of it. The second is the work from home current situation, which everyone is mostly working in a hybrid situation, especially where you don't have a lot of client facing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That may impact the consistency with which you're trying to implement a certain routine. Because we talk a lot about routines, right?
Yeah.
About sleep, how it sets the day in order. Now, when you're working from home, is even a visiting office, the scenarios are very different. So from an implementation point of view also, how do you get everyone on board? How do you get everyone to actually practice certain things where they can improve? So these are some logistical challenges which are also coming up. So if you want to, kind of speak with the HR leader and, they are facing these issues where just getting across this message, which we are also trying to give, could be difficult because of different communication barriers or just overall the workload being very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a potential solution where, it would help them break it into smaller steps and then take it forward?
So I think to answer your question, it's going to be really important to understand. I mean, most of the gist of our conversation has been that human bodies are very different. Everybody's requirements are very different. And therefore, the care and the solutions they need are going to be very different. And many times with corporate workshops, I think the plaguing issue is the attendance, which tends to be on the lower side. And one of the reasons which I feel that tends to happen is because people don't find it relevant to their problems. Because a lot of the times corporate workshops will, teach you what to eat. They'll give you certain generic guidelines on what is healthy, what is unhealthy. Exactly. And many times a person may not find it relevant because they might be struggling with a whole set of other issues, their relationship with food, the fact that they want to increase their protein intake, but they can't have non-veg at home. But the workshop is telling them that is the only way to increase their protein. So there are a lot of ifs and buts. But having said that, the bottom line is you really need to start, sort of bottling it down to individual issues. Yeah. And one of the best ways to do that is to get them assessed individually and have them spend some time one-on-one with different experts, whether it is related to their exercise, their injuries, their ergonomics, their posture, which is a big one in corporate these days, their nutrition. And once they're able to kind of spend that time with an expert and they're able to open up, they might get much more insight out of it and they will be much more likely to implement that, which will then have a positive, effect that will transpire into other areas as well. So I think really focusing on individualization and the right valid scientific testing of different things that generally plague corporate employees is going to be really important.
Towards the end of the podcast, but I think what you exactly mentioned. So one of the camps we did in Gurgaon, and we were expecting maybe 50 or 60 people to come in.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, and we had to shut the counters. We had 140 people.
Too many people.
Got the test.
Yeah.
They were pulling around 3 or 4 others saying, "Come in, you must do it."
Yeah.
Right? So because you got first an idea about where you stand at the individual level, and then of course our experts were there counseling them one-on-one in terms of what that result meant. So obviously that kind of effort would be needed to let people understand and pay more attention to it, because once it becomes individual and they know it's coming from a reliable scientific
Right.
source, then things begin to change, and it's a domino effect.
Absolutely.
We literally saw unfolding before
Yeah.
us. So
I think it's common knowledge. Like every time you visual and audio cues can only propel you so much, but when you actually see something practically in front of you in the form of a test or a number on a blood test report, I think that creates a bigger stir of emotions that then motivates you to take action.
one of the last tests we did, which was like really an eye opener of sort, and that goes because the test was you have to close your eyes. You have to open your eyes.
Nice pun.
Right? And then you have to close both eyes and try to balance on one leg, single leg, eyes closed balance. And that tells you what is going to be your risk of fall in the coming decade or years, right?
Yeah.
And that basically correlates to your inherent sense of balance. And when we did that test again, I think we had 59% of the people who had a high or extremely high risk of falls in the coming years, right? So that was a big eye opener, because on one leg, a lot of them were able to balance for 30-40 seconds. But the moment it came to eyes closed, like
Yeah.
3 seconds. And that's the kind of insight which an individual might need. That's the incentive, or that's then the spark someone needs to say, okay,
I need to work on
this.
this.
Even though I'm feeling great,
Yeah.
and absorb all kinds of food and stressors and injuries, that gives you an idea. So that's what the whole intent of Corporate Wellness 2.0 is. We are bringing our elite athlete methods, which you've been practicing over the 12 years, of bringing it to the corporate world. It is scientific, it is very individualized, it is research backed, and we are trying to just help one individual at a time. But we do have the resources, the intent, and the means to work at the organization level. So if you are someone working in the corporate space, if you are a CEO or CXO, or especially if you're an HR leader and you want to discuss this in further detail, you can write to us, and Rukshara and our super team will be very happy to cater to your queries. So that's it from our end. Any concluding note from you, Rukshara?
I think we all need to spend a little less time sitting and a lot more time moving and eating better. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Have a great day. Thanks.
All right.